Now, Sadiq Khan, London Mayor, has denied he plans to charge motorists for every journey in a pay-per-mile road tax, claiming it's not on his agenda. That's despite being part of his transport strategy published in 2018.
Well, of course, these things come to the fore because it's all ahead of the ulez, the ultra-low emission zone expansion, which starts tomorrow, which is going to make the capital the world's largest pollution charging area.
Well, Neil Garratt, Conservative member for the London Assembly for Croydon and Sutton, joins us this morning. Very good to see you this morning, Neil.
Morning.
So what do you make of this plan?
Well, I think it would fundamentally change the way that roads work in London. I mean, this is not just a central London thing. You know, in some other cities, there are all sorts of schemes just in central London. This is the whole of London, all the way out to the outskirts, including, you know, in the green belt, in loads of suburban areas that we have in outer London where cars are the main way that people get around. Effectively, the plan would fit a kind of taxi meter in every vehicle. Every time you move your car, the taxi meter would ring up a fare, which you would pay to Sadiq Khan. That's what he's working on. And what's frustrating is that it's obvious that he's working on it. There's you know, reams of evidence. We've read in the Times this morning, in the Mail on Sunday yesterday, in his own transport strategy that it's being worked on. They told us last year, they told us they had, you know, teams of people working on it. There ought to be, I think, a major public debate about it, whether you support or oppose it. And there isn't, because Sadiq Khan just has this ridiculous, implausible denial that he's even doing it.
Yeah, but if he is... Right, he's denying it's happening, which would put him in a very difficult position if it suddenly came in. So what you have to question politically, and there's elections coming up and all the rest of it, is this just a ploy from you Tories to say, oh, it's just another attack on motorists?
Well, I mean, you say... So ulez comes in tomorrow. So in July, just before it came... So he announced the consultation in March 2022. July 2021, so 8 months earlier, he denied any intention at all to expand ulez to the whole of London. Right. And then literally 8 months later, launched a plan to do exactly that. That's his MO. You know, his MO is to keep everything closed, don't tell anybody what he's working on until it's ready, then announce it as a fait accompli. And I think it drives this sense of cynicism in the public, which I think is really unhelpful, whether you support or oppose that policy.
Lots of people will be watching and listening to this up and down the country. They won't be in London. They'll see this as a London problem. But the fear is that this isn't a London problem. We could see these sorts of schemes rolled out across the country.
Potentially. I mean, I think there are two ways in which it's a non-London problem. Firstly, of course, people who don't live in London. I mean, I'm not originally from London. You know, people visit London, and it would mean not just driving into central London, which people generally don't do. It would be, you know, anywhere in the outskirts of London, any of the outer boroughs. If you drive in there from just outside, you would be caught. And then secondly, as you say, there's a potential for similar schemes to come in elsewhere. And actually, the Parliamentary Transport Select Committee looked at this a couple of years ago, and one of their conclusions was, if there is going to be such a scheme, it really has to be a national scheme, otherwise it would be chaos if you've got, you know, 50 separate different incompatible schemes.
You're Croydon and Sutton. I mean, will you fall under ulez?
Oh, yes. Well, so...
Because I mean, that's nowhere near London, really.
No,
it's a long way out.
Yeah, exactly. I got the 6:30 train to get here this morning. It's 12, 13 miles. There's no tube anywhere in Croydon or actually, or Bexley or Bromley or Kingston, for that matter. There's a great swathe of South London.
So what are your...
It is in ulez. Yeah.
What are your constituents telling you, Niels? And I mean, it's people who want to use their cars, one thing. It's more the tradesmen, isn't it, who are reliant on their vehicles.
ulez is a big issue for tradesmen and vans, simply because, to be compliant, diesel vehicles need to be only within about the last, since about 2016. Almost all vans are diesel, of course, and so it's much more difficult to get a diesel vehicle that's compliant. And there's this sort of horrible game of musical chairs where there just are not enough compliant diesel vans for all the people who want one, and so they're just looking at having to pay £12.50, which of course just becomes an inflationary pressure. They just pay that charge and pass it on to customers. And as you say, in places like Croydon and Sutton, it's not the urban metropolis, it's the suburban edge of London.
And Neil, it's the expense for people as well, isn't it? I mean, if you're looking to upgrade your vehicle in the cost of living crisis, for many people it's just not a possibility.
No, and actually that's, in many ways, I think one of the worst aspects of this is that you either have to pay £12.50 a day, which is just ludicrously unaffordable. It's like a sort of financial punishment beating, or you have to buy a new car. And Sadiq Khan would talk about his scrappage scheme. That's going to pay you about £2,000 towards a car, which is not enough to buy a new compliant car. And this is actually, interestingly, a lot of his Labour colleagues have been bringing up exactly that point. including one of the Croydon Labour MPs, Steve Reed. He made that point. The Labour leader made that point. Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, made that point. He's just not listening. And I think when we think about the pay per mile stuff, his whole MO is just not to listen to anybody. And this is partly why I want to make sure, A, people are aware that it's happening, and B, that we ought to have some public debate so people can be aware of it and think about what...
Yeah, but don't your constituents, don't the good people of Croydon and Sutton want maybe, less traffic on the streets, maybe, less pollution coming out of the back end of vehicles?
They do. I mean, well, the interesting thing about less traffic, of course, is everybody wants less traffic. Well, other people generating less traffic, they themselves still want to drive.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the challenges I have with this, is that effectively, when you strip away the sort of PR waffle around it, it's a method of pricing people off the road. Well, who's that going to affect? To be blunt, it probably isn't going to affect me. I'm probably still going to be able to drive my car. It is going to affect lots of the less well-off people.
Yeah.
Places like New Addington, places like St Helier, big council estates in Croydon and Sutton. Loads of tradesmen there, loads of people who do important but not always well-paid jobs. They need to get around, and they generally use cars, and they often use older cars.
Yeah. That's a very good point. Neil Garratt, good to see you this morning.